Are you recording already? Oh, there. Perfect. So good afternoon, everyone, or good morning or good evening. I'm not sure what time of the day it is for you. I am Melanie Somerville. I'm a tenure-track postdoctoral fellow at the Department of International Environment and Development Studies at the Norwegian University of Life Sciences, or NMBU is our acronym, our Norwegian acronym that we go by. And I am chairing this session, which is called Transforming the Global Countryside, Rural Persistence and Change in the Urban Century. And maybe I'll just take sort of a minute to explain where this session came from before I turn it over to brief presentations from our session participants. So I am one of the conveners for another session. In fact, there's sort of a session in two parts, I guess, at the DSA. They run tomorrow. I believe they start at, oh boy, now I have to check whether they start at 11:10 or 11:50. But that one's called Counter Agrarian Reform. And initially, one of the presenters in today's session applied to that session, and then we were asked to consider adding 3 of the other presenters. However, since it didn't seem to us that what we could see about the papers at that point, the abstracts necessarily grappled explicitly with the question of agrarian reform, which is what we're sort of spotlighting in our sessions, I proposed to the conference organizers that I just make a new session of the four papers that we'll hear briefly about today, because it was very clear to me that they were all sort of high quality pieces of work. And it seems to me that they dealt with sort of a common theme, which is also common to the sort of counter-agrarian reform panels that we'll have tomorrow, which is basically, it just shows sort of the continuing relevance of the agrarian question, even in a sort of purportedly urban century. As you likely know, the theme of this year's conference of the DSA conference is just sustainable futures in an urban and mobile world. But I think what these 4 papers show really nicely is just how important differentiated processes of agrarian transition and rural transformation continue to be, and differentiated by geography, among other features. So we have papers focusing on Ghana, Indonesia, Colombia, and India today. And the organizers for the conference have suggested that each participant just take 2 minutes to give sort of a summary of what their main contribution is, and potentially, or I guess ideally, including a discussion question that might help to focus our discussions or that we might address in the next 40 minutes. So maybe we can just do that in the order that you appear in the program. So that's Surulola, Ida, Kiyumi, and Kranti. I hope I'm saying your name right. Please correct me if I'm not. And then I guess in terms of, I didn't see any questions on the actual conference page yet that we need to field, but if people do have questions or comments, then please, there's 2 ways to raise those. So one is in the chat pane. If you open the chat pane on your Zoom, you'll be able to pose questions there, or you can also use the raise hands function. And I will just try to keep an eye on everyone and, you know, call you by name, basically. So yeah, and on my end, I will try to keep my microphone muted much of the time. I'm sorry if there's background noise because I have a talkative 5-month-old sitting beside me. So I think I heard kids in at least one of the presentations from the panelists when I watched them. So yeah, thanks everybody for joining us. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to the discussion. So maybe Surulola, can I hand it over to you to give a short presentation or a short summary of your piece?
Of course, I'm very happy to do that. Can you hear me, please? Excellent, excellent. So as the chair said, my name is Surulola Eke, and I'm a Banting Fellow and Adjunct Professor in the Department of Political Studies at Queen's University in Canada. So my paper examines the intersection of climate change and capitalism in agrarian economies in northern Ghana. So basically what it does is it responds to, you know, the growing concern about how the intersection between climate change and capitalism is unsettling agrarian economies. However, it departs from the dominant focus on, corporate and state-led capitalism and considers other forms of micro-capitalism that also intersect with climate change and that also intersect with climate change and destabilize, the social relations of production within agrarian economies. And the significance of this work is that by reconceptualizing capitalism from corporate and state-led capitalism, which I've classified as hard capital, and also focusing on micro forms of capitalism, which I've called soft capital, we can broaden the discussion of how capitalism and climate change is unsettling agrarian economies by including other contexts of agrarian destabilization that are excluded from the dominant from the prevailing discussion around, the intersection between climate change and capitalism that is currently being led by, the Journal of Peace and Studies Agrarian Forum, Climate Change Forum, I beg your pardon. So my main discussion question will be whether you think that, whether the panel, my fellow panelists and, the audience, think that we need to reconceptualize capitalism to include microforms of capitalism. So, and by microforms of capitalism, I mean those, forms of capitalism that do not entail, intrusion into agrarian economies by way of, establishment of commercial farms, right? But in terms of, intrusion in terms of service provision that these agrarian economies previously did not rely on. So service provision in terms of plowing services and sale of fertilizers. So that form of capitalism has made agrarian societies in northern Ghana susceptible to, price shocks, indirectly susceptible to price shocks, and that intersects with climate change to, reduce, farm yields and then, destabilize the social relations of production that have held, that those societies, together for decades. So my question is, whether we feel that we need to change how we view capitalism, or whether the concept of capitalism today, whether the concept of capitalism today, does justice, to other, whether we can incorporate other, cases of the intersection of climate change and capitalism without necessarily changing, the concept of capitalism itself as I've proposed.
Great. Thanks so much, Surilo. That's a compelling question for sure. So maybe we can move on now to Ida to give your short summary, and we'll just sort of hold all of the questions and discussion until all four of you have given your summary, because might be nice sort of interactions, I think, between the pieces.
Thank you, Melanie, and thank you for the opportunity, and for the DSA panelists. Thank you, Surilo, for the nice overview of your presentation earlier as well. Very happy to be here. I'm Ida from the Development Cafe. It's a research think tank based in Indonesia, Kenya, and Tanzania. So my presentation was about how free informed prior consent, or FPIC, has been exercised within the initial stage of a planned food estate program in Indonesia. And it looks specifically at two provinces in the easternmost part, which is Papua and West Papua. And I was interested to look at whether social justice had been held. And the data was primarily derived from desk reviews, interviews, and data from an ongoing UK-funded program called Papua Spatial Planning. It's implemented by an organization called Land Equity International and Diameter Consulting. And so why this is important. So understanding the aspects of FPIC about social justice can shed light on the complexities on the ground, especially regarding land use and how it contributes to the developing knowledge in this field. And I feel that this research is essential to contribute to the growing evidence and literature on indigenous people's rights. And lastly, this is relevant because since this is a state-sponsored food estate project, it's currently being developed and could potentially impact deeply the indigenous Papuan people's livelihood, even more so for their cultural integrity, food security, which is deeply rooted in their customer land. So I looked at the concepts of EPIC, as I mentioned, and it's used a lot in Forest Stewardship Council, for example, sustainable palm oil also principle. And so a lot of organizations use this to consult with customary and indigenous people to get their consent to move development to their land. And so this is a concept that is really prevailing in a lot of parts of the world, especially in rural area and tropical rainforest area, not just in Papua, but also in Brazil, in the Congo Basin. And a lot of development is, of course, taking place that are located in the customary land of the indigenous people. And so the argument there, basically, I looked at different arguments and different narratives from the government, from the private sector, and from the indigenous communities, and from CSOs representing them through secondary data interviews. The fact is that the EPIC process has not been very, at least within the sample respondents, that the EPIC process have not been really thorough, and it has not really included many of the important, it included all elements of the society as the principle should look at. And within the concept of social justice, the concept of what that in the different perspective between how that just the companies do not only look at maybe the monetary values of the products that could be grown in the area, whereas for indigenous peoples, it's more beyond that, it's their life. And so it's an anthropocentric philosophy called utilitarianism. Corporations employing EPIC usually typically use it to secure access to land and convert the land's value through money to be paid to landowners. So this clash with efforts from indigenous people and CSOs who start to be more engaged, well, and therefore the right or the rules under which the good is pursued itself is less defined. And so that political justice need to be done in order to insist that people have inalienable rights. So there's the concept of right that I looked at, and also, yeah, it's more elaborated in depth in my presentation, but basically that there are different discourses of justice within cultures. And so in order for social justice to be rightly upheld, it's necessary for each party to really speak authentically within the cultural context and acknowledge the validity and of each other. And so there's also the environmental and ecological justice concept that I looked at, and in the end I proposed that more qualitative research needs to be done to find out more about whether environmental injustice have occurred towards the indigenous people in Papua and West Papua. Thank you.
Great. Sorry about the background 5-month-old noise here while I speak to you, but yeah, that's great. Thanks, Ida. I think we should move on directly to Kiyumi. And again, folks, try to keep it fairly short because otherwise we'll use up all the time for discussion. So.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kiyumi. I'm doctoral researcher at the Institute of Development Studies at the University of Sussex. And thank you so much for the summary, Surola and Ida, and I'm very happy to be here to discuss. So yeah, I'll be brief as much as possible. So yeah, my research is mainly about the influence. My research looks into the potential influence of social capital on smallholder farmers' choices and outcomes of engaging in the dairy market particularly. And this research looks into the potential power of alternative resources that can be formed through social interactions by farmers themselves, instead of focusing too much on traditional types of capital, such as physical capital, human capital, and other types of farm assets and facilities, for instance. So given that this research finds that I found that bonding social capital, which is differentiated from another type of social capital, bridging social capital, is pretty much based on the interactions among the farmers and the villagers within a specific boundary of communities, rather than the bridging social capital, which is more about open interactions with people who have different backgrounds, different types of resources, or in different status, social status. So given that the power or the influence of bonding social capital is greater than the other type of social capital, and also given that bonding social capital has a significant influence compared to other types of factors that can affect the farmer's choice or farmer's decision to participate in the market, and the earnings from dairy farming. I would like to pose a question that is how policy can contribute or support such bonding social capital of small scale farmers rather than or without disrupting such type of endogenous resources. Yeah.
Great, thanks so much, Kumi. And Kranti, I think you're the last of the four, so maybe you can give us your summary and a discussion question if you have one.
Hi, I'm sorry for the bad light. As luck favors, I just lost my power today the moment I joined. So I'm joining with phone, and please excuse me for the noise, if any, background. So I'm Kranti Nanduri. I am a doctoral student. I've actually submitted my thesis and about to defend it in very shortly.
I think, Kranti, you're frozen on my screen. I'm not sure about other people. It might be a connectivity issue. It's keeping it authentic when you know, we lose power in the middle of our presentation. Can other people hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I was like, maybe the problem's on my end. I don't know, you know.
I think Kranti is frozen, so maybe she needs to switch off your video or something.
Yeah, that's a good idea, Kranti. If you turn off your video, but keep yourself unmuted, then that sometimes lowers the bandwidth and helps. Good suggestion, George. Well, maybe in the interest of sort of keeping us moving forward, we can start with some discussion, and if Kranti is able to rejoin us, we can just make space for her to give a quick summary at that point. So Kranti, yeah, if you can still hear us, then please, you know, jump back in. It may help to disconnect and reconnect. Sometimes that helps as well. I don't see her even in the panelist list, so she may have lost connection entirely. But yeah, I mean, oh, sorry. Go ahead. Oh, there.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I think I'll keep my video off so that the data connectivity. Yeah.
Perfect.
So my so the paper is titled as Rural Informal Sector as a Development Engine, especially Rural Development Engine. And that's what my paper tries to focus on and highlight the issue that this urban informality discourse, theoretically and empirically, has somehow neglected looking at rural informal sector and rural non-farm activities as potential sites of capital accumulation and growth engines. Because even if you take Lewisian structural model, it comes from American model of capitalism. Or if you look at Marxian English transition, description of English transition, there petty commodity production is looked as something that dissolves in the process of transition, and there is no clear-cut distinction between rural and urban non-farm activities. But if you look at the East Asian path,
Well, we were going strong, but we might have lost her briefly again. Yeah, I can see.
Agriculture.
Okay,
But there
there
is
we go.
also another aspect where it is preferential access to the US markets. So in this context, actually, when we look at the Indian agrarian transition, it's no longer along the lines of classical transition. What we see is mostly semi-proletarianization or partial proletarianization, where peasants are moving to petty commodity production without leaving the land mostly. Right. So in that context, actually, it makes a difference whether the agricultural productivity in the region is growing or not and how prosperous it is. And India is a large country with diverse regional trajectories. And in this paper, that's what I try to look at. And one of my findings, important findings, is that informal sector productivity in rural areas is higher in those regions with higher agricultural productivity as compared to those low productivity regions. And another major finding is that rural manufacturing enterprises, we notice that they hire more wage labor in these agriculturally high productive regions compared to the low productivity regions. And that's just a beginning evidence. But one limitation of my study, or one thing to keep in mind, it's a broad macro study. And definitely this calls attention to the fact that we need to go in detail to look at the dynamism, how things are operating. So my question for discussion would be, for third world countries like India, or Africa or Latin America, for some instance, should we actually focus on rural non-farm activities, or should we only look at urban informal sector for sustainable economic growth? Because now we see that the market access, like East Asian case, is sort of constrained. Some would even argue the moment has been bypassed. Is it bypassed or not? But also our domestic market growth is also constrained due to lack of investment sources. So how do we deal with this is the question I pose to the panel. Thank you. And I'm sorry for the interruption.
Great. Thanks for bearing with us despite the interruption. So maybe, I can see sort of an interesting overarching question that we could talk about, but before I sort of take chair's prerogative, maybe I should give you guys a chance to pose questions for each other or as an audience member for one of the presenters. And again, you're welcome to do that either using the chat function, or if you want to use the raise hand function, we can use that, and I will just try to call on you. I will scroll back and forth and try to see if anybody puts their hand up. Okay. Okay, so I don't see anybody. Oh, I see you, Kanti. Okay, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
My power is back. Thankfully.
Yeah.
So I have questions of. So we are talking about questions, right? Unless I missed.
Yeah.
I have questions for Ida and Humi. And my question for Ida, first of all, I really enjoyed both of the presentations very much because it resonates with my area or somewhere. And Ida, I wanted to know if there are any examples of successful public dialogue. In your paper, you mentioned that it's a two-way process, and generally that is not what is happening. Indigenous people only receive information from one hand, from government or others. But in that case, how could a public dialogue be constructed? Because what we see is there's a lot of information asymmetry or unequal bargaining power that indigenous communities face. So even if not in Papua's case, how would it look like in any successful case? Are there any instances? That's my question to you. And for Kumi, so I was just, I had a lot of questions. Probably I will connect with you separately. But one question I wanted to know, I wanted you to answer for me is, so in your study, social capital, bonding social capital is making major difference, whereas bridging social capital is not really making much of a difference, at least to the income and poverty. But here we are talking about the social capital, right? So do you think the initial endowment of the community itself makes any difference? Because in your presentation, when I watched, I could not get an idea of the sample. Are there homogeneous community in the place that you studied, or are there differences? Because Well, in that case, maybe if there are any differences in the physical endowment or the initial endowment itself, then social bonding or bonding social capital or bridging social capital might have made much difference. I'm just thinking out loud, so I'm not sure. So this is my question. Thank you.
Great. So do you want to each return or respond in turn?
Sure. Since Kranti asked for me first, so I can try to answer. Thank you so much, Kranti, for the question. I think that's really relevant. And yes, this was, and thank you for listening to my presentation. I think whether there's been successful FPIC is that something that needs to be analyzed further, because it's more complex than we thought. There are obviously a lot of plantations being opened up within the customary area. Hello, of Papua, and so we need to investigate whether the persons that are included in the FPIC consultation processes are representatives of their people, because there's a lot of power dynamics within the tribal groups, and there's been talks about whether they're under pressure from the military or the police or any other representative from the company. And so truly in-depth, almost anthropological research would need to be required, because we're dealing with different dialects, different customs, and there are hundreds of tribes in Papua and West Papua. Each of them have different kind of structure. But yeah, and the background justice is, the epistemological is also different, because from the perspective of the market, of the companies, is that the market is valuable instrument for serving human wants, like higher profits, yielding higher agricultural outputs, but it's not really an instrument for expressing and debating like the higher ends of humanity, of humankind, like what are the demands of the indigenous people. It's not solely monetary. So in that sense, there's already a clash in that sense, in that way. So it's quite a complex situation, and I don't really have an answer for you. I hope there are successful examples, but that needs to be investigated. Thank you, Kranti.
That's great. Okay, so Kobe, I see that you had your hand up, so maybe we can go to you, and then I see some interesting comments and questions from George in the chat pane as well. Oh wait, you know what? I didn't give a chance to respond yet to you, Kiyomi, so I should do that first.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you, Melanie, and thank you, Kranti, for the question. So I understand from your question that, and your question is about the chance of some farmers having more physical capital, and yeah. So actually, yeah, I haven't really specified this point, or like all the factors that I have asked to the participants, but I've included the key components of physical capital in the physical capital that the farmers have. So so that I could have some even partial control over these factors. But obviously there is a limitation in this research, because I haven't really I couldn't see any changes in these factors, even social capital. So I cannot really claim that social capital leads to a specific choice of how they engage in the market, or the income or the farming outcome. So that's a critical limitation, but at least I wanted to show how social capital, or how like alternative resources can be decisive or can be associated with such outcomes, rather than giving too much attention to physical capital or some large-scale investment.
Great, thanks. Sorry for accidentally almost missing you. So now maybe we can revert to Minkobi. If you have a question, please go ahead. And then, there's some comments, as I say, from George in the chat pane as well.
All right. Thank you so much. Good seeing everyone, especially our youngest guest, Ivo.
A future agrarian change scholar, perhaps.
Interesting presentations. I have a comment for Surulola. Sorry, I missed the earlier part, but I did have a look at your video. And I think your work is very interesting. And I would like you to think a bit hard about your notion of hard and soft capital. I think perhaps you may want to really dig deeper there and perhaps say big or small capitals, large scale or small scale capitals, capitals from above or capitals from below. And for granting, just one question. What can you say about the ecological dimensions of your work? Because it seems, you are looking at different regions and what impact that may have on productivity. And the QB, since you are in IDS, and you have looked at the work of Ian Spoons, what can you say about class? Hello, Ivo. Oh man. Okay, Ivo, you want to answer that question? Okay, let me end it there. Thank you.
Okay, great. And hopefully you can all see the chat pane, but maybe in case you can't, I can just read George's comments, which is that Indonesia is very interesting. I'm curious about the feasibility of prior informed consent given the state's purported support for palm oil investment. And are there any reactions from below to the palm oil companies' misdoings? He says that in Ghana, it would be interesting to trace on a long journey the transformation of the capitalist relations, as well as the climate change processes, particularly those that can be located in the capitalist epoch. Okay, I think that last comment is maybe a little bit of a difference, but maybe you can give us a chance or a response to those questions, Ida.
Well, thank you, Melanie. I was about to ask whether I should respond in the chat or in verbal, but okay.
I think it's nice to do it verbally, yeah.
Sure. Thank you, George. Yes, that's I guess that's the feasibility of FPIC, especially that we can see that the power is not equal amongst the parties, and so whether it's feasible or not, I think yeah, there's a lot of criticism towards FPIC, and it's been chiefly a tick in the box. It's not adequately conducted. It's also, FPIC is derived from the demands of the consumers, who knows that in developing countries there are a lot of deforestation and stuff like that. So it's actually just aligning with the market environmentalism paradigm, and so it's another monetization of nature, and that it has value, that there's every possible value has a price of exchange, and so in that sense, the needs of the indigenous people that goes beyond monetary is not really reflected. But I think it's important to elevate this kind of issues through research, to better research, so that there can be improvements towards the process, because in absence of alternative, this might be the best tool that can be used, especially that we cannot stop development at this for the time being. And so how to perfect or better improve this kind of tool is what's required, and hopefully there are more research going on about this. Thank you, George, for the question. And yeah, there are reactions. There's a lot of news media about what not just palm oil but also sugar and rice. There are those that are really intensive and extensive kind of farming techniques that are that needs to cut down trees and traditional livelihood of the indigenous people in Papua and West Papua.
Great. Okay. And Sir Lola, I don't think we gave you a chance to respond, but you can see that, you know, Kobe's question about hard versus soft capital was the same sort of question that I had about the, you know, your reasons for choosing those particular terms. So do you want to speak to that for a few moments?
Yes, yes. And please, I would like to crave your indulgence that I may need to leave early because I have another conference that starts in just a few minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, but I would like to quickly respond. Yeah. So thank you so much for the comments / questions. But I believe that, you know, I will, you know, as I, you know, revise the paper, I will consider incorporating other concepts to fully explain what I'm thinking of. But right now, where I'm at in my thought process is that, you know, soft capital actually captures, you know, the mild incursions into these agrarian economies as against the more intrusive entrance of, you know, hard capital, corporate capital. So intrusive, very intrusive or hard intrusion in terms of establishing a farm that dispossesses, you know, people of their land and also disengages people from smallholder farming into, you know, working for, you know, corporate farms, you know, as against, you know, capitalists who simply just provide services to agrarian economies in order to advance their smallholder farming.
Great.
So that's why right now, you know, where the paper is at is, you know, this concept, you know, the distinction between the concept of, you know, hard and soft capital. But I think I also like the idea of, you know, saying capital from above and capital from below, because those soft capital enterprises or those, you know, yeah, the soft capital enterprises, you know, those enterprises that I've classified as soft capital actually exist closer to these agrarian economies in the township, you know, as against, you know, corporate capitalism that usually comes from above or far away or through foreign direct investment.
Great. Okay, thanks. And so, Kobe, I can see that your hand is maybe still up, or is it up again anew? I'm not sure, but maybe you can jump in. We only have a few more minutes. I don't want to keep people too much longer since I know that Sir Lola, you're rushing off and others maybe have sessions. So we only have about, well, 1 more minute left in our session, but we can maybe end with your question, Kobe, if you have one.
Oh, it's an old hand. Sorry, I've lowered
Oh,
it.
it's an old hand. Okay. Well, that's good. Then we're pretty much right on time. And yeah, sorry, it's, you know, been a short session, it seems like, but I think we're all sort of experimenting with this new format that DSA is following. But yeah, I mean, I really, again, thanks everybody for participating and thanks so much for your papers. I found them really interesting. My question would have been, and I think it's sort of a nice point to end on, is that it seems to me that all of the papers in different ways speak to what's missing from sort of conventional agrarian transition accounts, whether that's types of capital like social capital or particular sectors like the rural non-farm sector. And you know, there's a bigger question here that has always sort of interested me in debates about the agrarian question, which is just like, where's sort of the boundary of agrarian or rural capitalism? What counts as capitalism versus feudalism, et cetera, in conventional accounts? So maybe we can just you know, end on that and encourage you all to continue doing great work. And thanks for parachuting into our session. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Melanie.
Okay.
so
Thanks,
much.
everybody.
So
Okay.
much.
Bye for now. Thanks, Lily, for your help.
Oh, thanks,
Bye.
Chair and the co-chair. Thanks.
Thank you. So I'll be ending the meetings now.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.